Hello and welcome to Where Are Our Girls? The goal of this podcast is to spread more awareness on missing Black girls in the United States and the relation to human trafficking. Our aim is to clear any misunderstandings about the industry and bridge the media gap and get more outlets to report when our girls go missing. As of this month, here are some of the names and ages of children and women who have gone missing in Washington, D.C. Carlissa Blackney, age 14. Jose Dare, age 13. Everett Almendarez, age 13. Asara Addison, age 14. Tori Gibson, age 14. Chloe Hooks, age 14. Elijah Howard, age 15. And Tyree McCarthy, age 17. Today we're discussing prevention methods that have been used to combat human trafficking in the United States and how we as listeners and activists and humans can destroy modern-day slavery. Very few human trafficking cases are prosecuted because many human traffickers are arrested for lesser crimes than human trafficking. Human trafficking itself is a felony and a huge crime. It's a crime against humanity, but in the United States legal system, it is a highly punishable crime. However, most of the easily spottable and convictable crimes that are seen and used by police officers are pandering and soliciting prostitution. The problem with this is that often the victims are the ones in trouble and not the traffickers. And this causes a greater problem, however, because when prosecutors don't have trafficking cases, the public doesn't believe it's a problem. When communities don't think it's a problem, like in DC before the missing Black girl epidemic, there's a lack of importance, and therefore less pressure on the police to investigate them. And when police don't investigate human trafficking cases, there's a lack of prosecution against sex trafficking cases, and so the brutal cycle continues. Trafficking legislation is hard to come by and is only comprehensive in states where numbers of human trafficking cases are at their highest. Regarding comprehensive legislation, states such as Washington, California, Texas, Florida, Iowa, Indiana, New York, and Connecticut, they have the most comprehensive legislation. But most states have basic legislation. These include Montana, Idaho, Nevada, Arizona, Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, Arkansas, Minnesota, Louisiana, Illinois, Mississippi, Kentucky, Michigan. It's a lot. North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alaska, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Delaware. But then there are states with no legislation against human trafficking, which include my own, which are Massachusetts, which is where I'm from, Oregon, Utah, New Mexico, Colorado, North Dakota and South Dakota, Oklahoma, Alabama, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, Ohio, Wisconsin, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. And this is a lot of states with no human trafficking legislation. And as a result, traffickers will take these girls from different states with maybe more comprehensive legislation to states that don't have as much legislation, so that there's a lesser risk of them being caught because the police aren't trained in human trafficking cases because there is no legislation. Now, this doesn't mean that there are no investigations being conducted. In fact, there was one conducted in Glover Park in D.C. in 2006. And though it was a little over a decade ago, it offered a lot of insight into how human traffickers disguise their rings. This particular ring was at the OK Spa, and it was a Korean sex trafficking ring which forced women with large debts in South Korea to pay them off by working against their will in the United States. Many rings pose as spas, massage parlors, strip clubs, and online escort services. Thankfully, this particular underground ring was busted by a raid, and the women were returned home. Many investigations, however, aren't as big as this one, and often law enforcement are unaware of human trafficking laws in their state, which makes comprehensive legislation so important. Without it, police rely on the victim's testimony in court in order to arrest a pimp or trafficker, but many victims are distrustful of law enforcement. This can be because they have been arrested themselves. In fact, 35% of victims in cases of sex trafficking were arrested. But it can also be because they are afraid of the consequences of snitching, of saying who the pimp and trafficker is. In some cases, victims and prosecutors fear the jury won't even convict the defendant in the trial. And to be quite honest, if cases are in fact brought in front of a judge, a majority of them end with a plea bargain. Even worse, because there is limited legal access to human trafficking laws, prosecutors have a hard time battling human trafficking cases in court without a victim testimony. There are some laws being passed to protect victims under the age of 18, which helps children stay out of the system. In fact, the Safe Harbor Bill was passed in Washington, which prevents juveniles from being prosecuted as prostitutes and directs juvenile sex trafficking victims to non-punitive specialized services like shelters for young people and recovery programs. As said before, though, this only pertains to children who have been sex trafficked, so older women who might have been in the industry longer fall victim to being criminalized instead of rescued and protected. In fact, only 1% of sex trafficking victims are rescued. And this is worldwide, this is 27 million people. And in the United States, it's a lot. It's a lot of women and children who are being trafficked. Though a good thing that comes out of this is that victims who have escaped the rings tend to help other victims who are in trouble, who might still even be in the business. But what I want to talk about is what victims need most. I think most victims, when they get out of the industry, they need some sort of community shelter and services that help these people find a safe place to stay and have people around them to help them get back on their feet and rehabilitate them into society, since they've been locked away and abused. As I said before, many former victims of human trafficking end up helping other victims, but there really needs to be government funding to help these young people, since there's not enough legislation to prevent it. But as well as shelters and legislation so prosecutors can convict traffickers and police can arrest them, there needs to be more community awareness about human trafficking and proper investigations into local businesses that are used most often as undercover human trafficking rings. Labor trafficking is the easiest to combat in this matter, since most underground labor trafficking facilities are at restaurants and factories. So the FDA can conduct unannounced biannual visits if they wanted to make sure all of the workers are safe and treated fairly, as well as to investigate into businesses that could be deemed shady and possibly involved in human trafficking. But personally, I think it's really up to being educated early on about human trafficking and trying to put a stop to this, because people don't address it as it really is. This is modern day slavery. These people, these children, are being held against their will. They have to work. They have to have sex with grown men. They are being raped every day. They are being abused every day. And nobody is actively trying to get them out of this system. And unfortunately, in the United States, of American women and children in the human trafficking industry, so many of them are Black and brown. I think it's up to us to protect them and to spread more awareness. And this comes from the communities that we are in. If we know that our state or district has very little legislation on protecting people from human trafficking, we need to advocate and lobby and protest for more bills to be signed. We can't just have one strong bill, the Safe Harbor Bill. Though it's useful, there needs to be something that is more of an umbrella that can protect women who have been abused and stuck in the sex trafficking industry, and children who have been stuck in the human trafficking industry. there needs to be more done. And from a community standpoint, we need to do that. There needs to be posters. It needs to be taught in schools. College students need to know more about this. They're the ones that can vote and are among the majority, the youth, We need to advocate for more legislation about this. I want to thank everyone for listening to this third episode of Where Are Girls? This problem is something we can tackle every single day. We must protect one another and bring back the sense of community to battle this disease. Human trafficking is rarely discussed, but it is so deeply ingrained in our everyday lives. We must continue this conversation and work diligently. We have to spread awareness and bring our girls back home. Thank you for listening, and tune in to the next episode. I also want to say I'm going to put my sources in the description below, so anybody who wants to find out more information about human trafficking and look at the research that I have done to get more information for themselves, I will have it below in the description box. Thank you.